Hello everyone, thank you for joining and welcome to BDBI Radio. BDBI stands for Baker's Dozen Business Intelligence. This is a weekly webcast with 13 productivity tips on different topics in the SQL Server, business intelligence, and even in some SharePoint areas. The website for this, you probably already know it or you wouldn't be accessing this, is www.bdbiradio.com, and it is Sunday, March the 17th. And the topic for today is 13 differences between Analysis Services Tabular model. This is the new analytic model in SQL Server 2012. Going to look at the differences between the SSAS Tabular model and the more traditional Analysis Services OLAP model. The Tabular model, obviously making a lot of news in the last year or so with the release of SQL Server 2012. We're going to take a look at the differences between that and the way you would build traditional analytic applications using OLAP with Analysis Services. So we will get to the topics here in just a minute. First of all, brief introduction if this is your first time attending. My name is Kevin Goff. I'm a SQL Server MVP, Microsoft SQL Server MVP. I've been an MVP since 2005. And I also am a regular columnist for Code Magazine. Code actually stands for Component Developer Magazine, where I have a regular series called the Baker's Dozen Productivity Series. So this webcast, Baker's Dozen Business Intelligence, is sort of a live version of many of the articles that I've written in Code Magazine. If you're not familiar with Code Magazine is known more as a traditional .NET application developer magazine, but it does have different topics in different areas, and I actually write regularly on database topics. So even though it's first and foremost a .NET magazine, they also branch out into other areas, and my column is one example of that. This is a pre-recorded weekly webcast. It's available every Sunday. Actually had to move things around a little bit. The recorded webcast is now going to be available Sunday evening, just because of a few changes in my work schedule. No longer able to get the recordings up by Sunday morning, but they will be available by the end of the weekend. I promise that. The site is www.bdbiradio.com, and my overall blog, it actually goes to the same site. It's www.kevinsgoff.net. Again, you have already seen the site, or you wouldn't have gotten here, but just in case, let me pop into the BDBI Radio site for just a second here. And we have the welcome message at the top, and today's topic is 13 differences between SSAS Tabular and SSAS OLAP. And the prior recordings are down at the bottom here, both the slide deck as well as the saved recordings. I'm actually using YouTube as more or less the portal for the saved recordings. Last week was 13 tips for creating OLAP cubes, and now we're going to take a look at the differences between SSAS Tabular and SSAS OLAP. Actually, by the time this recording is finished, the links will be up here. As I'm actually recording this right now, the links are not yet up there, but by the time you're watching it, they'll obviously be up there. So you can go back and pull down the content from any prior episode. Okay, so the program format, 13 tips on different SQL Server, BI, and sometimes SharePoint topics. Any one week I might cover 13 tips on data warehousing, 13 tips on SQL interview topics. A show I'm going to have probably later in the spring is going to be in areas where .NET and BI come together. So a variety of topics, hopefully going on for a long time. If you have any questions along the way on anything, feel free to email me. The email address I'm using is bdbiradio@gmail.com. So feel free to email me and certainly get back to you as soon as I can. If you have any suggestions for a future webcast, feel free to make a suggestion. I obviously can't guarantee that I can put together a 13-part series, but you never know. So if you have any suggestions, feel free to ask. Now, before we start, upcoming community events where I'll be speaking. These dates are confirmed. I was actually just this past Monday night in Manhattan for the BI user group run by Andrew Brust in Manhattan. So the next two confirmed events coming up on Thursday night, April the 25th, I'm going to be actually back in Manhattan, same building, the Microsoft Regional Office in Manhattan for the regular SQL Server user group, and going to be talking about new features in SSAS 2012. Also on Monday night, May the 20th, I'm going to be at the Nova SQL Server User Group. NOVA stands for Northern Virginia. The topic has yet to be finalized. It's probably going to be something dealing with reporting services. So those are the next two confirmed dates. I will probably be speaking at some of the next four, not sure which ones. There's a Philadelphia SQL Saturday coming up in Malvern, a big one on June the 1st, and then a couple of SharePoint Saturday events in the Mid-Atlantic, Baltimore, Washington, and New York City later in the summer. Probably be at some of those. And the two big pieces of news, one I've actually been advertising for a while, so it's not really news. The bottom one is the SQL Server 2012 Service Pack 1 is available. If you're using 2012, definitely recommend pulling that down. And also, if you're using Visual Studio over in the .NET side, and if you're migrating to Visual Studio 2012, you might want to keep your templates when you're creating BI projects in line with the same version of Visual Studio. Well, Microsoft has released SQL Server Data Tools, which used to be known as BIDS, for Visual Studio 2012. So you can now use the Visual Studio 2012 environment, the shell, to create BI applications, and I've got the link there. So today's topic is 13 differences between SSAS Tabular and SSAS OLAP. Now, ironically, I gave a presentation that was very, very similar to this in New York at the BI User Group this past Monday night. So if you actually were in attendance, you're going to see some of the same content again, although I've actually added a few pieces along the way in the last couple of days. Now, this is not a presentation on how to build solutions in either one from scratch. That's a separate presentation. I'm going to basically take a look at solution components along the way, looking at the different areas of a BI application and where SSAS Tabular and SSAS OLAP are similar and where they're different. Now, if you want to see the steps for building a basic OLAP project, of course, last week on BDBI Radio, I covered 13 tips for building an OLAP cube with analysis services. If you want to see a pretty similar presentation for building a tabular model from scratch, late last year I wrote an article in Code Magazine for building a tabular model, and the link is right here. I'll just quickly pull it up. It's a free link available on Code Magazine's website, where I actually walk through building a tabular model from scratch. And I use some of the AdventureWorks data to build the equivalent of an AdventureWorks OLAP cube, but this time I build it using the tabular approach. And along the way I do talk about a few of the differences with OLAP, but it really focuses on building something from scratch with the tabular model. So if you want to see, I'm obviously not going to go through this, you can pull down the article and read it yourself, or print it, or save it to a PDF or whatever. You can obviously go through and use that as your first experience. If you haven't built a tabular model already, you can use this as your first experience for doing so. So this presentation is going to talk about the differences between the two. Now, in a scenario like this, a presenter, a writer, might hold off on his viewpoints, on his preferences or opinions of one versus the other until the very end. You know, a person might compare A and B, and then at the end say, well, I prefer A after what we've seen because of this and this and this. I'm actually going to break that rule. I like breaking rules from time to time, and I'm going to break that one. I'm going to give my personal viewpoint up front. I do have a preference for OLAP. That does not mean that I'm going to bash Tabular. It doesn't mean that I dislike Tabular. There's some areas of Tabular that I do like, and I think in the next release of SQL Server, whenever that's going to be, Tabular is going to be even better, and probably better than OLAP in many areas. But at this point in time, here in early 2013, I still have a slight preference for OLAP because it does some things out of the box that, in my opinion, are simply preferable to the way they work in the Tabular model. Again, it doesn't mean that I think Tabular is terrible. I do like Tabular, but I prefer OLAP. Now, in some cases, one is really not superior to the other. They're just different. You might implement something one way in OLAP, and you might implement the same functionality in a different way in Tabular, and you take a step back and you say, okay, is one really better than the other? Probably not. They're simply different. And that's my viewpoint of certain aspects of tabular versus OLAP. Now, along the way, I'm going to try to address a couple of viewpoints and a couple of misconceptions that are out there. One is that OLAP is dead. OLAP is not dead. Now, it won't surprise me if Microsoft adds very little to OLAP in the next release of SQL Server. That's a personal viewpoint. I have no knowledge of what Microsoft is going to do with OLAP in the next release of SQL Server, but it won't surprise me if they either don't enhance it or they might enhance it a little bit. But my guess is that the functionality we have in OLAP right now is probably going to stay about the same. But that doesn't mean that it's dead. There's still a lot of companies out there using SQL Server 2008 or 2008 R2 or even SQL Server 2005 where they're not moving to 2012 for at least another year or two. And even when they move, there still is going to be the learning curve in going with tabular. Now, 2-3 years from now, do I think that OLAP is going to be in a different stage as far as the market and as far as the need for OLAP developers? 2-3 years from now is going to be a different story. But for right now and for the foreseeable future, companies are still looking for people with skills in SSAS and with MDX programming, which is the programming language with OLAP. So for now and for the foreseeable future, based upon where the jobs are out there, OLAP is definitely not dead. Now, the tabular model, the new way of creating analytic databases in SQL Server 2012, is sometimes touted as easier. Well, that depends upon what you're doing. In some cases, it might be a little bit easier, but once you get into some of the deeper aspects of applications, that concept of easy sort of goes away, and it has sometimes some of the same learning curve as what you have in OLAP. Now, as I said, I'm going to go through multiple demo pieces. I'm not going to build something from beginning to end. I'm going to pull up existing applications and focus on one area and sort of compare and contrast the tabular model and OLAP. Now, I'm actually going to jump to the end here for just a minute and make a book recommendation. So I'm going to go to the last slide here and go to my book recommendation. There are a couple of good books on Analysis Services 2012, specifically the tabular model, but this one is the one to get. It's put up on Microsoft Press, and it's written by the same authors, Chris Rebb, Alberto Ferrari, and Marco Russo, who wrote the OLAP Analysis Services 2008 book that I recommended last week. This is a fantastic book. This is a 5-star book. I wrote a review on it up on Amazon's website. Get it, read it, and read it again. If you work with a tabular model, you should have this book on your bookshelf. I sort of joke that these three guys, Webb, Ferrari, and Russo, are sort of the three wise men of the tabular model. They have worked with a tabular model. They have worked with the DAX programming language in and out. They've also written, some of these guys have actually written separate books on DAX and the integration of DAX with Excel. So if you see some of their other books and if you've got money to spend, you might want to pick them up. But this is the one to get. I highly recommend this book. As of the last time I checked, you can get it for about $35 or so. Okay, $37, and you can get it. You can get the Kindle edition. Obviously, you get a free Kindle reader for a laptop for $30. Again, not trying to sell anything to anybody, but if you want to get one book, people ask me for reading recommendations. This is the book to get. There's 6 very good reviews up here. I wrote one of them, and this is a fantastic book. Also, I've got the 3 blogs for the three individuals here. Definitely recommend keeping up with their blogs. These guys have written a lot of content. They've been great for the developer community, and I'm indebted to them, and I know a lot of other developers have been indebted to them for a long time. All right. Now, having said that, the topics for today. First of all, I'm going to go into a brief history of the two methodologies. History sometimes is important, especially when you're going from release to release of SQL Server. Going to talk briefly about where these two methodologies, the OLAP model and the tabular model, have come from. Also going to talk about getting started with the two methodologies using a basic star schema. Then I'm going to talk about where these two methodologies start to differ. And it's when we have more advanced relationships between fact and dimension data. That's right. Just in the same way that you build OLAP cubes against fact and dimension data, you build tabular models, preferably against fact and dimension data as well. Well, if you're lucky, you're working in a pure star schema, and the two methodologies are going to work pretty much the same way. But if you have more intermediate or advanced relationships, if you have many-to-many relationships or complex snowflake structures, or you have role-playing relationships, that's where the two methodologies differ. In analysis services OLAP, these capabilities are built into the product. When you work with DAX, with the tabular model, you have to use the DAX programming language to make up for where the tabular model sort of falls a bit short. Also going to take a look at the two programming languages, MDX on the OLAP side and DAX on the tabular side. Going to take a look at creating KPIs and calculated members in both. And then we're going to look at some of the other areas that have been in OLAP for years and going to compare them to what we have in the tabular model to see where they're similar and where they're different. Going to look at partitions and aggregations. Going to look at perspectives. Going to look at rollup versus direct query for instances where we want our deployed analytic database to be nothing but a virtual definition, nothing but a shell, where the queries actually go back to the original source. Well, here is definitely one area where we've got some pretty significant differences in functionality. And specifically with direct query, you lose some non-trivial functionality within the tabular model if you go to direct query in the tabular model. So we're going to take a look at that. Going to look at security roles for defining who can see what data. Going to look at deployment models and deployed objects. What happens when we deploy OLAP projects and tabular projects? What do we get and what are the restrictions? Going to take a look at updating both models incrementally. I'm going to take a look at accessing both models using different client tools like reporting services, Excel, performance point services, SharePoint, Power View, the new reporting tool on the block. And then finally going to take a look at an overall feature matrix. So that's what we've got in store for today. Now, I'm not going to try to do this as one long video. I'm going to break this up into pieces. So I'm actually going to stop the first video right here. And the next video will actually get started with some of these topics.